time. You'll see I'm not alone today. I've got a friend back in the studio. I got Miss Christiane Thomas. She is the founder of Leading by Example, and they're doing workshops now across the state. But when you hear that Mississippi is leading in mental health, or at least trying to address it, we really are making strides in our state. I think that's a good thing. So welcome back, Christiane.
Thank you, Miss Rebecca. It's been a minute.
You've been busy.
Yes, ma'am. I have.
Okay, let's just kind of go back because this is your brainchild. This was your baby project. You came in full of passion and fire, hoping to spread the word and be careful what you pray for, right?
Right. You predicted this. You said it.
I said it was going to catch on and it was going to be a good thing. When did you first get the idea for Leading by Example?
During the pandemic. What was that, 2020?
Yeah, the year in which we don't discuss.
It was back in 2020. We were sitting at home. Mental health became a topic because mental health was challenged during that time when we was just, we was all sitting still looking at each other.
And isolated.
Very isolated. With me, for sure, my son was off at college. They still continued school. So it was like, I'm at home. What am I going to do with all this time? So I started just hearing different people talk about different things. So I was like, okay, let me just put some stuff together and see what happens. So that's kind of how this was kind of birthed out of that idle mind. It wasn't the devil's workshop this time.
No, not at all. And with your years of experience in law enforcement, you thought that was kind of a good place to kind of start, or at least start the conversation. How did you bridge those two, I guess, passions or interests together?
Well, working as a law enforcement officer and in the courts, I saw a lot of things that was needed. Then as officers, we needed more tools to put on our belt to make sure that we was, we had to take care of ourselves during the pandemic, because you think about everybody was pretty much at home, but first responders had to report to work. There was no off time. Some may have been fortunate, according to what our positions was, to work home, but then there's time where we had to break that barrier and actually go out in the community. So our mental health became an issue. Stress, anxiety, some even depression. So I was like, if we're not right, we can't help anybody else. So that's kind of one of my presentation. Do I need some help? When I say that, people always kind of look like, what? Yeah, do we as law enforcement or first responders or correction officers or probation officers, do we need help in order to help people that we encounter on a daily basis? And yes, we do.
Why is there such a stigma? Or I guess I'm sure the answer feels, like it's just right there. But why is there such a stigma within law enforcement and first responders or corrections officers to sort of raise their hand and say, if they were sick, if they had COVID or they had the flu, I'd call in or whatever. But it's when you're not feeling right inside and it's affecting your job, why don't we come up?
It's perceived as weak. Then according to what position that you're in, if you're carrying a weapon, your weapon may be taken from you for your own safety and others. It's a lot that goes into it. And then if we know a cohort may be going through, some serious mental issues, we're very reluctant because we don't want to put that tag on that person. But I tell them all the time, I would rather tag that person than for us to be giving you a 21 gun salute, something of that. I just be real with them. Sometimes we have to get that knot, as I call it, out of our throat and do what is in our best interest or our cohort best interest.
And then, too, looking out for each other, because I know in law enforcement as well as first responders, rarely are you out on the job alone, or if you are in your own vehicle, you're staying in contact with a bunch of people. And so it's taking care of watching for those same signs for, the ones you're showing up for shift for, or you're just spending a lot of time with. Because sometimes a person won't necessarily raise their hand for themselves, but a friend can kind of nudge and start to ask questions too. Okay, you started with your small trainings here centrally. What was your first vision for it? It started out very modest, and it's grown.
It has grown. My first vision when I first got it, I brought in the ministers, elected officials, and executive and law enforcement. And my best friend is on the parole board. Marlo Stewart was like, why would you put all three of those together?
Sounds like a joke. A minister, right. Whatever, walked into a bar.
Right. And he was like, are you serious? I said, yes, because typically when people need help, those are the three people that you're probably going to encounter. Your clergy, your elected official, and everybody think the police can fix everything.
Yeah.
So those are the people that need the training, I feel like need the resources, need to know what to look for, if they need to refer somebody over to, your community mental health center, what the Department of Mental Health have available. I tried to make sure all of that information was in those workshops when I provided it to them. So it went over well. You covered it, the media covered. You told me this about to blow up. So here I am now, get ready to represent the state again.
So how did we get to this moment, Christiane? I know you just left earlier with the legislators. What the message that you're getting out there is starting to really catch on. More people are interested in it. So how has it kind of grown to a statewide program over the last year or 2 years?
Well, I have been all over the state again. Last year I was privileged to have over 250 chiefs at the Chiefs Conference for 2 hours. So anybody that knows police chiefs, I had a task, but it really went over well. There was no resistance. They had a lot of concerns, what was valid concerns. I tried to make sure I provided them with as much information possible in those 2 hours. From that, I've had several trainings to derive from going to the chief, to where I went back to their department individually and did training for their employees there. So when I go to the departments, whether it's the chiefs, the sheriffs, or they bring in everybody. I did reservoir patrol. I always tell them bring the dispatchers, everybody that's going to be in contact with a call. You need to make sure that all those people be on the same page.
What were some of their concerns? I mean, I'm sure it's different because each city has a different culture, and then each department also has a different culture within it, that it may have specific needs. But were there some that kind of overlapped where it was like, okay, maybe this is something I hadn't thought about that needed to be addressed?
Yes, pretty much they wanted to know what resources or what to look for. I tell them the resources are out there. We just got to go tap into them. The Department of Mental Health has a great website where you can just go on and click, and it'll tell you every mental health resources that have registered with them throughout the state. There are other organizations that actually is trying to do a large resource binder, and it's going to be electronic. We are moving where we need to be, progressing little by little. And then they just want to know, some of them, when I did my own agency, Department of Corrections, and I shared with Commissioner Kane last week, I did 14 sessions last year for probation parole officers. Not one time did I do a session where someone didn't come up to me during break, after the class, or I receive a text or phone call, or both, when I was leaving and going home. We as officers do have internal things going on with us, but some of them didn't want to share it with the class. That stigma, I didn't want anybody to know. So the need for law enforcement and mental health training and mental health, just self-care, it is there. We got to take care of ourselves.
Is there a way for you to get anonymous help if you're in law enforcement, like where, maybe it's not, I guess, the 811 number would be, or is it
988?
988. Do not call 811. Do not call 811. They would be asking you where you wanted to dig. You'd probably get a really good laugh, though, if you were in a bad mood and you called the wrong number. But the right number, so I guess that would be one of the best places.
988.
988.
The mental health crisis line. It is a great resource. As a matter of fact, I just got off the statewide committee meeting this morning. We had a 2-hour meeting. They are putting out information. There's going to be more
So that's
PSAs.
one of those resources.
Right.
But what I'm hearing from you, Christiane, is there are a lot more resources for mental health and your upcoming workshop. So we're going to get to that and more coming up next.
Okay.
We're continuing our conversation with Christiane Thomas. She's the founder of Leading by Example, offering mental health workshops statewide for law enforcement, for first responders, for correction officers, who all else in there, for elected officials, whoever wants to come. Churches,
schools, whomever
wants to come. And it feels like everybody wants to have what you're doing implemented into their programs or, their institutions, which I think is a really good thing. Part of this, though, since you created this, is you have gone around and looked at what other states are sort of doing. Do you pull from that, or also do you realize, hey, Mississippi's really putting mental health first in a lot of areas before other states have thought about it?
Well, both. I'm going to go back to one of the other resources for law enforcement was Mississippi First Responders. They do have some help for law enforcement. You can always call Ms. Ruth over at Mississippi First Responders. They do have counselors or therapists available for law enforcement. That's one of the things I found out as I got deeper over into, just meeting people and networking, that it's available for law enforcement.
And it's one of those where you reach out, you get your help, but it's not necessarily an automatic ding at work or wherever. You
Absolutely.
just wave your white flag and quietly can go and get the help that you need there. So that's great to know.
Yes. But we are taking a progressive approach towards mental health. Other states are Alabama and Louisiana. They our sister states. I did. I just kind of rolled the dice. I said, let me see just what I got for me. So I submitted for approval for continuing education. I already had received it here in Mississippi, so I said, why not try next door? So I tried Louisiana, and they send it back and say, it's approved. And I said, well.
So you better get on your traveling shoes.
Right. So then I tried Alabama, and I got an approval back from them for continuing education for law enforcement. One of the things, as I was sharing with you earlier, Louisiana have where officers have so many hours per year that they have to take for continuing education. And mine fall up under the mental health continuing education as one of the electives. That's what I would like to see Mississippi at some point get there. And I think we're making that progress because Representative Creekmore actually have the House Bill 1222, which is going to require law enforcement to have mental health first aid, public safety, and then have at least one officer certified in CIT, Crisis Intervention Team. And the Crisis Intervention Team is just working with your community mental health center. We have a point of entry, which will be a hospital, that if somebody's in a mental health crisis, you can take those persons there to get an evaluation, or it may be a stabilization center through the Department of Mental Health. We're just trying to make sure jail is not the answer. And mental health should not equal death either. So the only way to do that is, just take an honest approach about what do we need, what we don't have, and all of us coming to the table trying to figure out how to get it.
So your workshops are twofold, Christiane. It's one, taking care of you, the law officer or the first responder, your own personal mental health, and sort of taking, account for that. But then also how to respond or what to see when you're on the job or in the community from others. So is it two-pronged in each workshop? Like, do you kind of address both?
I do. It doesn't matter whether I'm at a church, school, PTA meeting, whichever one it is, I'm going to always talk about the mental health part, and then we get to the self-care. I always call it selfish self-care that we all need to practice at some point in our time. I would say every week. Just don't do it every day while you're at work, though.
Unless you got understanding bosses out
right,
there.
But we need to practice some self-care for ourselves to make sure that we're okay.
What are some of those self-care tips that maybe you give, particularly the first responders and the officers, because it feels like maybe what they come home with is a little bit different. And I would say even healthcare professionals who work in, ER or critical care units or pediatrics, it's just their stress and what they bring home may be a little bit different than us with, not life and death jobs or saving life and death.
It is. And sometimes it's just getting away. Just getting away from everything. I actually did that this weekend, went with some friends, and I left computer at home. They was like, you didn't bring anything? No. The only thing I had was my phone, but I didn't check no work email, no nothing. It was just a time just to do nothing but bore yourself. I told a friend of mine, I just sat there till I bored my own self. Sometimes that's a good thing to do. One of the things I do, a lot of times I would just have nothing on in my house. My friend came over. She came to pick up some food one day, and she was like, you got company? I was like, no. She said, well, why are you just sitting here like this, the light on? You just sit. It was just my meditation, what I do, just to kind of decompose, just decompress, but not decompose. But, I don't want to decompose.
That long rest.
Right.
Then we call 811 and bury you.
So, just to, get myself and my thoughts together. That's some of the things that I do. And then get in the car, just take you a ride. Just don't leave and nobody ever see you again. But, just make sure you got to figure out what it is that you need to do. Because what relaxes me may not do the same for you.
I think there needs to be a resurgence in adults having hobbies outside of their families or with their families, not maybe outside their families, but then also outside of their profession. So when the coloring came back for grown-ups, I found adult coloring books odd to say. So grown-ups, when grown-ups... I've always thought that was just so odd for them to just display that. It was just them doing something, with their hands or something they enjoyed maybe, before they became worked up with all the pressures of being an adult. Or it's playing basketball or it's picking up, I don't know, any sort of activity that just brings you do it with your hand or do something with your hands and distracts you, but it also brings you joy. And I think we miss that as adults. We let that go.
Absolutely. And we got to do that. I mean, figure out what's good for you. So I thought about the adult coloring books because a friend of mine actually was talking about buying everybody one. I was like, really?
It sounds like it's a terrible name. Terrible PR. I don't know what you call it. Crayons for grown-ups. I don't know. But,
right.
But it's just a way, people, you're forced to put down the phone. I know as we move into the springtime and the summer, a lot of us all get busy outside or back into our gardens, but we kind of lose that throughout the year. But it's about being intentional with just ways to sort of relax yourself or whatever it may be. I love at the beginning of the year the idea that some want to read. They set like 12 books a year and do it with like going back to hard books, Christiane, because it makes you put down your devices, your digital downtime. And I think that's so important. We don't give that enough credit. Even if your work email isn't on your computer devices, you're so locked in on doom scrolling that it sticks with you. It's hard to let it all go.
And that's something I found myself doing a lot of reading on my electronic device. So what I've started doing is printing it off. Then I realized my eyes not like they used to be.
Well, there's always that good balance with it as well.
The first time I was like, this don't look. So when I went to the eye doctor, she was like, you need glasses. I was like, okay. But that's one of the things, put your device down and actually physically read it or have the book or whatever the report is. And that's one of the things I've started doing.
The other piece to your workshops, though, Christiane, is this idea of connecting with the community or, I guess, with law enforcement, though, they are working with the community. They're coming up. They don't know who they're going to approach that day. But that's the same for all of us, though, right? And not that we're going to connect the lady at the line at the grocery store or, the grumpy man at the whatever to their mental health services. Do not elbow them and be like, the Department of Health has some great resources. I think being aware of what to look for also can be helpful and keep you safe as well. What are some of those, I guess, telltale signs that, hey, this person may need to be handled with care?
Well, their appearance could be something, and then what their speech is saying, if they're acting kind of erratic, mumbling things that people can't understand. But one of the things I told the mental health people when I first started working as a law enforcement person, you can experience drugs and put you in a psychotic state. And as a law enforcement officer, we don't know the difference. So, but as the law enforcement officer, it's a good thing to have mental health training because once this person do come down off of whatever type of illicit drug they may have experienced with, then it may be a mental health issue that they're dealing with. And a lot of times people use drugs, instead of medication, for their mental illness. But once that the drugs wear off, you still got the mental illness. So it's kind of hand in hand.
And just being aware of it, too, I think is the big part. And, too, being aware of when your next workshops are going to be offered. I know you're headed out all over the state, so we'll get to that and more with Christiane coming. Don't you wish you could have, like, mental health alerts? Like, with all the new devices, Christiane, that you wear, from the different oval rings to the smart watches to all of that, you wish you could figure out something that would come up and say, chill pill. Like, take a chill pill. And I feel like with all the data now you can get, you probably could see trends. But really, if you're just in tune with your own sort of mental health state, or if you're feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, which that really is the first step in your own self-care, is being able to recognize when you're starting to frazzle, and then stepping back from that. Then, you could offset a lot of the, I guess, spiraling effects, sort of that. But your workshops aren't just for self-care. They're also for those that are out there to protect and serve, to be able to do that. And you've got a lot coming up. So what's on your agenda for the next probably 12 months, 12 years?
Well, this week I'll be headed to Oxford, Mississippi for the Mississippi Justice Court Clerks. I'll be there as a presenter. Then I'll come back home for a day, and then I'll be headed to New Orleans to the American Probation Parole Association Conference. It is the largest probation parole association in the United States. We're having a regional in New Orleans this year, and I will be a presenter and the roundtable panelist, and also I sit on the committee and represent the state. So we was in a committee meeting, and they wanted a formal incarcerated person that is out in the community, making a difference and just making a big difference. So the first thing came off my tongue was Miss Pauline Rogers with the Reach Foundation. And I had seen Miss Pauline several times, but I had never just interacted with her. So I just rolled off her name, and I said, I hope she can do it. So when I contacted her, she was just in awe. She was like, are you serious? And I said, yes, ma'am. And I said, I just believe in being my sister's and brother keeper. I say, and why not display a Mississippian? If I have the opportunity and I'm sitting at the table, I said, because I'm proud to say I know you and I want the world to see you. So come on, we headed to New Orleans.
Well, you wanted to bring her here to Good Things to share what she's doing there with the Reach, but sadly, I guess scheduling conflicts. So give us a little background. Why was she the first person you thought of when you thought about those type of characteristics?
I saw Miss Pauline work. She helps incarcerated inmates' kids out with everything from school clothes, books, toys. She make a difference. And then when female inmates are released from prison, if they have nowhere to go, she give them a home and make sure, getting back on their feet. She was just featured on WJTV the other night. Out of all the women that have gotten out, her recidivism rate is right at 100%. Nobody has gone back. So
she's doing something right.
She's doing a lot right, and she's been doing this for over 30 years. So, when somebody's been in the game that long for 30 years, and if I have the opportunity to put them on this stage so, other people can see the work, then I just believe that's what I'm supposed to do, and that's what I did.
There's, a lot of shifts in mindset, or challenging old mindsets, or trying to think of ways to do things differently, from, drug stops or drug arrests to now mental health. But it feels like the things that work the best maybe are real intense and real whatever. But you and Miss Pauline and all those are running towards that instead of away from that, or trying to find bullet point sort of ways to fix it, or put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, I guess would be another way to sort of think about it. So what keeps you pushing in, even though it feels like you're drinking from, an ocean? An ocean. I wouldn't say fire hydrant, but ocean's fine too.
Well, what keeps me pushing in is like what I was sharing with you earlier. When I'm sitting at my desk and I get a call from the commissioner, my employer.
Because you have a day job too.
Yeah, I have a real day job, from Commissioner Kane, and he asked me about mental health and what, me being certified, and can you teach us? And I said, well, sure, Commissioner, what do you need me to do? So when he told me, so I came up with a mental health training tier for our agency where we can implement it, what we call on the community correction side, which is probation, parole, and institution, which is the prisons, for the corrections officers. That's what my task is when I get back from New Orleans. I will jump into that. He have given me the green light. He needed it done. I was in a position that I knew how to do it, and he's one of those people, go do it, go ahead. This is what I want you to do. So that's when you get those kind of phone calls out of nowhere, it let me know that the work that I'm doing is not in vain. It is valued and it is needed. This is by far probably one of the largest mental health, I would say, training that we're going to just, do a bliss and just jump in, mass training, for all the facilities is what we're getting ready to try to do within the next 60 days. I would say we would start February the 1st, and the next 60 days we'll be hitting each facility doing the Shadow to Silence, which is a suicide prevention training for law enforcement and corrections, which is give them what signs to look for, what things, to prevent it, what questions to ask, because they're working with those inmates inside of the facility. And my future, working with the workforce Deputy Commissioner Bradley Lum, up under him, we was talking, and I told him. He said, "Well, what do you see this at?" I say, "Not only do we need to get the correction officers, we need to get the people that's being released, the inmates. They need to know or have some idea if they get out, things get stressed, depressed, anxiety. They start thinking suicidal thoughts. What can they do? What resources are available for them? Because they still a human being that's coming outside of those doors, and we got to make sure as part of reentry, we prep them with that information also."
This is just the start. I mean, it's one of those things that once it starts to sort of sink in, and then it'll become part of the culture, and then it'll grow, and then, it's more accepting and more understanding, you'll start to see the benefits, but it starts as just a little bitty seed. And I can't help but to think back, Christiane, I mean, this was a little bitty seed during the pandemic, and there's so many, I told you it was going to grow. You're going to end up with a forest because it's needed, and I think it's the perfect timing where everyone's a little bit more acceptable of open-minded when it comes to mental health. But I don't want to lose sight either the fact that, you had this idea. You wouldn't have I think if you would have known 2 years later or 3 years later you would be here talking about this, you might not would have done it. And that's sort of how sometimes when you have dreams and visions or ideas, it's just good to only see one stair at a time, up the staircase. But there's so many others listening that may have a good idea for their community or for their workplace or, to help. And it's like, just step out and see, right?
Go ahead. Yes. When I first started, my family and friends thought that I needed a little mental health. I was like, nobody's going to listen to this stuff. And so I just kept on. I just tuned them out. I was just saying, I feel like the calling is on me. I've been anointed with it. I was like, couple times, I was like, Lord, why me? So why not you? That's what my pastor said. So I just went on and I said, I'm just going to keep going, and every time I would get this done, then something else would come up. So I say, well, okay, I'm just going to keep riding. I don't know where it's going to lead to, but my thing is, if I could save one life, that's worth me doing and that's my biggest thing is making sure, when I get phone calls about, like the other night, I think it was Friday night or Saturday night, somebody called me about a young man that had taken his life. My biggest thing was, I wonder what we could have done. I go into that mode, or I'm actually on the weekend not doing anything, and I get a call from one of my coworkers and said, I hate to bother you. And I'm, my heart dropped at that point. But it was an offender that was on their caseload, like house arrest, that had attempted suicide. So it's things like that you get, the calls that you get, that we could save one life.
So where can we go to get more information?
You could always go to my Leading by Example MS Facebook page. The Department of Mental Health has help available. You can go on that website, and you can also dial 988 if you're in a mental health crisis.
811 if you need to dig 2 working days a week. Christiane, I feel like this will be the first of many. Congratulations. Keep the good work up. And you guys stick with us. We got more for you coming up next.